Well, good morning.
Morning.
Happy Mother's Day. There's an old Jewish proverb, God couldn't be everywhere, so he invented mothers. Psalm 118:24. Za'asa Adonai v'nishnaka bo. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I'm going to get out the fire hose. We're going to go a long ways talking this morning about Israel in light of Bible prophecy and what is happening right now, the war in Gaza. So if you have your Bibles, you might want to turn to Ezekiel chapter 37. We'll get there eventually. But first I thought I'd start with something a little lighter. Baby Jesus at bath time. In. October 7th, Hamas, the terrorists, they came across the security wall and slaughtered men, women, and children, beheading babies. It was gruesome. It was awful. It was perhaps the most despicable type of terrorism one can imagine. 1,200 Israelis killed, over 200 taken hostage, some of which are still somewhere in Gaza. This is the iconic picture of this Israeli-German gal who was a tattoo artist, half naked, being dragged in her body in the back of a pickup truck. Again, it was awful. And Hamas is celebrating the slaughter. And here they are rejoicing the fact that they were able to kill Jews. How has Israel responded to this? Well, if you've been following the news, of course, first of all, Israel's been using air and ground means to try to root out the terrorists, Hamas. Hamas, of course, they're using hospitals, they're using women and children as human shields. That's increased the death toll, and that keeps rising. Looks like 35,000 if you believe Gaza. And Hamas has hundreds of miles of tunnels underneath. A lot of the money that's been sent to them to help their people, they've used to build tunnels and amass weapons so that they could eventually do what they did on October the 7th. There's no secret about that, and a place where they can hide their weapons. So on April 1st, Israel struck the Iranian consulate in Syria, in Damascus. And there were 7 of the leaders of the Iran military, including 2 generals that were killed, along with some other people. And of course, that caused a counteraction. So on April 13th, and we're not even going back a month yet, for the first time in history, Iran has launched a direct attack against Israel, consisting of about 170 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. And by the way, when we say it's the first time they've done it directly, Iran has been involved in what we call a proxy war against Israel for years. And a proxy war is when you use someone else to do the fighting for you. Like we're in a proxy war in Ukraine right now. We're helping Ukraine to beat back the Russians. But it's been a proxy war for a long, long time. The question was, is Israel going to respond? Well, they launched sort of a token attack. They really didn't go too far on April 19th because they did not want to escalate the situation. Now we go just a few days ago. Egypt has warned that if Israel goes into Gaza, where they are right now, into Rafah, where they are as we speak, which is supposed to be part of this demilitarized border zone, Israel has threatened to say that we're going to walk away from the 1979 peace treaty. So there are a lot of geopolitical and biblical situations that are arising here, and one has to wonder what's going to happen. So we ask this question: the possible political and prophetic significance of what's happening right now in Israel. Is it possible we're seeing the beginning of the last days that are going to usher in this great tribulation and Jesus coming back to earth? By the way, Mike said I could talk as long as I want, but everybody leaves at 1:45, so I'll make sure that we squeeze this in. Thank you, Mike. Now, we know Jesus is coming back. He said that, John chapter 14, verse 3, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Well, he said, be ready, the Son of Man's coming in an hour we do not expect. But the Bible also says, as Paul writes to the Thessalonians, he says, don't Don't be concerning the times and seasons. You're fully aware of the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. If you want to know what time it is from a biblical prophetic perspective, God's clock is Israel. What happens with Israel tells us where we are prophetically on the grand scheme of things. God's clock is Israel. The Bible tells us that Jesus will return when Israel is back in the land. Well, they weren't in the land from 586 BC until the year 1948. So it's only been in the last, 80 years or so that this could even happen. Secondly, the temple will be rebuilt. Why do I believe that? Because Paul says in 2 Thessalonians, the Antichrist will set up an image of himself in the temple. So there will be a temple. Next, Israel will be the center of the last day chaos. Well, of course, it's happening. There it is. What's in the news today? Israel. It's even going to affect our election, perhaps some in November. Current events and biblical prophecy now are coinciding. It's exciting when it happens. The spark that ignites the last days is coming. What is the spark? What is the spark that might light the fuse for the last days? In my opinion, it could be, this is the title of my message, when Israel strikes Iran. Not if, but when. When Israel strikes Iran. I'm going to set all this up for you so that you'll understand this both biblically and politically. So, current events in light of Bible prophecy. So, first of all, there are some geopolitical considerations. We know Israel's at the epicenter of all of this, everything that's happening. But the effect on America, as we speak, we're talking about President Biden saying, I'm not going to allow certain bombs to go in unless Israel uses them the way we think they ought to use them. So America wants to micromanage what Israel is doing to defend itself. Now, there's some biblical and prophetic implications. I mentioned Ezekiel 38 and 39. There's a last days scenario from the New Testament we'll touch on. It's a lot to squeeze into a short period of time. But I want to present to you the looming battle. Here's the battle. Israel against Iran. Israel against Iran. This to me is a David and Goliath redux. Here's what we see. Israel, 9.6 million people, about 8,000 square miles. Lori and I, we live in California. San Bernardino County is the largest county in the United States. The entire state of Israel is only 40% the size of San Bernardino County. Israel's smaller than the state of New Jersey. Compare that to Iran, 88.5 million people, 640,000 square miles, 16th largest country in the world. Let me give you a little perspective as to Israel as it relates to its neighbors. How would you like to live in this neighborhood when all the green would be Arab Muslims who want you wiped out, and then you have non-Arab Muslims in Iran and Turkey? So this is the neighborhood. It's not Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It's 400 million Arab Muslims who want Israel gone. So if you're living in that kind of neighborhood, first and foremost is security, defending your right to exist and defending yourself. I want to give a little brief history of Israel. We'll go over this really quickly, but this is at least a good starting point. First of all, God promised Abraham that he said, through you, all nations will be blessed. And the nation Israel, God would raise up the Messiah, as we find out. And Bible prophecy makes it more and more specific. The seed of Abraham, and then Isaac and Jacob, the house of David. And then many prophecies in the Old Testament pinpoint who the Messiah will be. He'll be born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2. He'll be crucified. He'll be the lamb that's slaughtered, Isaiah 53, and all these things. The nations were formed, the 12 tribes. God raises up the monarchy with Saul, David, and Solomon, and the temple was built. Finally, the kingdom was divided in about the year 930 BC. So you had the northern kingdom, which was 10 of the 12 tribes, and the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom was called Israel, southern kingdom was called Judah, the two tribes in the southern kingdom. The prophets foretold, because Israel fell into sin, that God would judge them. So there was this pattern. And eventually, in 722 BC, the Assyrians came in and wiped out the northern kingdom of Israel. In fact, many of the Israelis stay behind and intermarry with the pagans, and those are the Samaritans, who are essentially half Jewish, half Israeli, half Assyrian. They even had their own temple. Read John chapter 4, the woman at the well. Well, where do we worship? Can't get into this. The southern kingdom was eventually wiped out by Nebuchadnezzar. You can read the book of Daniel to find out more about that. But in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar finally sacks Israel, destroys the temple, and carries away the Jews into captivity. So we've got the divided kingdom. When they're in captivity, Ezekiel's prophesying from the river Chebar, and he says in Ezekiel 37 and 38 that there's going to be Israel's like dry bones. And there's 3 stages here. The first stage is the bones are scattered. We call that the diaspora. The Jews are scattered throughout the world. But then there will be an ingathering. They'll be coming back to the land, but with no spiritual life in them. Then the third phase, the final one, will be Israel having spiritual life. And right now, I believe we're somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3. I see him out of the picture here. Mike warned me that he's a wanderer like me when we'll get out of the camera range and trying to record this. But the Bible talks about the invasion of Israel by Iran, or Persia. Persia changed its name in 1935 to Iran, by the way, same country, plus Gog and Magog in Isaiah and Ezekiel 37 and 38. So eventually the Jews then were allowed to return. They were carried away into captivity and then allowed to return back to the land. Under Ezra and Nehemiah, if you read those books in the Old Testament, you find them coming back. The Old Testament closes, and there's this successive period in which the Persians, who allowed them back into the land, then are overcome by the Greeks. Alexander the Great conquers Persia. Then when Alexander dies, his generals take over. The one who was up in Syria, the Seleucid dynasty, controls what is called the Levant, or the area of Israel, as well as Syria. Then eventually, in about the year 64 BC, General Pompey comes into Israel, what we call Israel, and subjugated it. And as a result of that, at the time that Jesus was born, the Romans are in control. And the Romans renamed the area Palestine. Where does the word Palestine come from? The land of the Philistines. The Philistines, Philishtim in Hebrew. It was a Roman colony. And then finally, the hinge of history, Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time, God brought forth a son, born of a woman, born under the law. Jesus Christ comes to earth, fulfilling the prophecies throughout the Old Testament. Messiah would come. So there is the beginning of the good stuff. Then finally, Jesus predicted it. And then in AD 70, the Romans come in, tired of the Jews antagonizing them, and they destroy the temple. They wipe out the Jews, and they take over, and Israel is scattered again and banished. But then there's been 19 centuries of the Jews being scattered. Now you would think that after being in the dustbin of history, nations don't come back to life. Well, God said there's a future for Israel, and Israel indeed becomes a country again. It was reborn. No nation Israel from 586 BC to 1948. There were a few Bible scholars who predicted Israel's rebirth. They looked at the scriptures, the prophecies, and they saw them literally. Although some said, oh, no, there's not going to be an Israel, so it must be figurative. No. And then in 1948, Israel becomes a country. Declares its independence. Part of this was as a result of the Holocaust, that many people thought that Jews need a homeland, a place where they can indeed be safe. Is there any prophetic significance of the Jews being back in the land? Well, the Antichrist is going to take his seat in the temple, displaying himself as being God. Well, if he's going to do that, you have to have a temple. To have a temple, has to be in Israel, has to be on the Temple Mount, and so we see the prophetic significance there. And then Jesus himself says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. So in the future, there will be a temple that will be rebuilt. Now, why hasn't Israel rebuilt the temple? Well, the reason is the Dome of the Rock. The third holiest site in Islam is right there on the Temple Mount. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock where supposedly Muhammad ascended into heaven. Now, a little peek about Israel from its rebirth to the present. Israel started out this tiny little area here. There's the the yellow part's Israel. And then after the 1967 Six-Day War, they took over the entire Sinai, all of the West Bank, all the way up to the Golan Heights, and all of Gaza. They eventually gave Gaza back in 2005. And so today, actually this could go all the way through today, this is Israel, but they ceded back this land to Egypt. So from rebirth to the present, and in 67, the Jews also took over Jerusalem, which they didn't have. But Israel has struggled to survive. The day after they declared independence, they were attacked by Egypt and 4 other Arab nations. 1967, the Six-Day War. Outnumbered 9-1, Jews win the war in 6 days. You think God perhaps is on their side on that? I think so. 1973, Golda Meir resigns as a result because she said we weren't ready. On the holiest day in Israel, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the Jews were attacked. And it looked bad. After 48 hours, it looked as if they were going to go down in flames. Egypt and Syria, up in the Golan, the Syrians were actually prevailing, and they were about ready to invoke what's called the Samson option. Golda Meir authorized 14 nuclear weapons to be prepared, to be ready. You read Judges 16:30, what happens there? Samson pulls down the pillars of the building to kill the Philistines, and he killed more with his death than he did with his life. And he said, if I'm going to go down, I'm taking you. Well, Israel was about ready to do the same thing. They were going to scorch the earth if they were going to lose. So they had nuclear weapons ready. We almost had World War III starting in 1973. But again, the tide was turned, and Israel militarily was able to not only fight back, but then to prevail. 1979 Camp David Accord with Jimmy Carter, they gave back land for peace. Didn't work out so well, but at least was the idea. Now, Israel continues to struggle to survive. So in 1981, they find out that in Syria, there was, in Iraq, that Saddam Hussein had his Bashir reactor, and they were getting very close to having nuclear capabilities to create nuclear products that they would use against Israel. So what did Israel do? Well, what they did was they sent planes from the Sinai down here in a secret air base to attack, unknown by the Iraqis, to take out the Osiris reactor and then head back. What's interesting, I have to tell a quick story here, check my time, is that as soon as they flew out on the secret mission, they were F-14s, and then they had some bombers. They were flying at 100 feet over the Red Sea as they began to turn east over Saudi Arabia, and thinking no one's going to know it's a top secret mission. As soon as they hit the Red Sea 100 feet up, they fly right over the King of Jordan, King Hussein's yacht, who's vacationing in the Red Sea. He looks up and he sees Israeli planes with external tanks, meaning they're going a long ways away. This is it. They're going after Saddam Hussein. They're going to take out his reactor. So he got on, that is King Hussein of Jordan, gets on the phone, calls Amman and says, pass the word down to Saddam Hussein, the Israelis are coming. And the message never got sent from Amman to Baghdad. And the Israelis took out the reactor, and which I think is previews of things to come, a preemptive strike where they didn't wait for anybody else. Now, how did the Muslims respond? Well, they formed Hezbollah, the party of God, and let me go back and say Israel's final departure from Lebanon as a prelude to its final obliteration. Well, they didn't mince words about that. So Israel continues to struggle to survive. I can't go into detail, but they call it the Intifada, where they get terrorist attacks, and then we come to 1991, the Persian Gulf War. What happens there? Saddam Hussein launches Scud missiles into Israel, but the good news is that the Scud missiles, number one, did not have poison gas, which the Israelis didn't know, and number two, Christians were standing in solidarity, praying for the peace of Jerusalem. It was on the actual day that the Scud missiles were flying into Israel, and we didn't know whether or not they had poison gas or not, that I was invited to attend a Shabbat, a Sabbath service at a temple where I live in Orange County, California. And so I was invited. It was kind of a last minute invitation, and I was there with a couple other Christian leaders. I was there with Robert Schuller and Hal Lindsey, the prophecy writer. And so what was kind of funny was I'm sitting on the stage there feeling overwhelmed, like there's Holocaust survivors in the audience. This was a great occasion. And there was a guy sitting on the stage, and I kept looking at him like, I've seen this guy before, older gentleman. I thought, I don't know who that guy is. Anyway, so Schuller gets up and says, it's a last minute invite. I have to leave. I have another appointment, but thank you, and prayed for him. Hal Lindsey gets up and says, thank you for inviting me. It was a last minute invite. I have to go. I have another commitment. And then I get up. I basically say the same thing. Thank you. It's great being here, and I leave. Well, I find out afterwards, the guy on the stage that I was trying to place, he comes up next. It was Joey Bishop, the comedian. Joey Bishop goes to that temple. So Joey Bishop gets up and says, what's this? The Christians get to leave early. For once I want to be a Christian. I got everybody bored at that. The Scud missiles were flying. Why did Saddam Hussein send Scud missiles to Israel when the fight is with America liberating Kuwait? The answer is to try to egg Israel into the battle so that all of the Arab neighbors would gang up and attack Israel. Now, the toughest thing was for Prime Minister Shamir at the time to stand down. And President George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41, said, please, Prime Minister Shamir, stand down. We'll take care of it, because if you engage, even though you've been attacked by Scud missiles, this could cause an entire rippling effect. And Prime Minister Shamir, bless his heart, and he was the Netanyahu of the day. He said, okay, make sure you take care of it as America. And Christian solidarity. There were some high-level meetings and a lot of prayer, and I was privileged to sort of be on the inside of this. So here I am, meeting with Prime Minister Shamir. I can't really talk about all that we discussed, but let's just say the Prime Minister was appreciative that Christians were standing with Israel in 1990. Now, the ongoing proxy war. First suicide bombing in Israel, suicide bombings. Finally, Israel withdrew from Gaza and parts of the West Bank in 2005. And then eventually Hamas has taken over, of course. And then daily rocket attacks. Now, Operation Orchard, 2007, what happens there? Well, we find out that in Syria is trying to develop some nuclear capabilities. And so Israel sent some commandos to sniff it out and make sure that was the case. And what did they do? Israel sent some F-15L fighters, and they took out the reactors. Here's the before and after. I would say they did a pretty good job of that. They flew back over Turkey. Turkey was not happy about it, but it was one of these situations where it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. And they successfully, preemptively, like they did in 1981 when they took out Saddam Hussein's reactor, took out the Syrian nuclear site. Is that a preview of Iraq and Syria, a preview of what's going to happen with Iran? Perhaps so. I don't have time to go into great detail on the history of Iran, but basically you know that Zoroastrian was the religion, but Islam took over in the 7th century. They're not Arabs, and so a lot of the Arabs don't necessarily identify with them. But here's the Ayatollah. When the Islamic Revolution took place, when they took our hostages of the embassy, etc., he said, we do not worship Iran, we worship Allah, for patriotism is another name for paganism. I say, let this land burn. I say, let this land go up in smoke, provided Islam emerges triumphant in the rest of the world. And the word Islam means submission. 88% of Muslims are Sunni Muslims, only 10 are Shia. The only two countries that have a majority of Shiites would be Iran and Iraq. And so it's kind of interesting that they're the ones that are causing some of the greatest problems here. Again, I don't have time to go into great detail about the particular viewpoint, but they have a lot of prophecy ideas, the Twelvers. They think that there is this Mahdi who's going to come back, who disappeared in the 8th century. And I actually think someone is going to come back, although that's going to be the Antichrist, not going to be the Mahdi. So anyway, by the way, I told Mike that all my slides here, I'm going to email those to him. If anybody's interested, I'm going to have all of these available for you so you can go through them at a little slower pace than what we're doing today, by the way. So we'll have those for you. But what do Muslims believe, by the way? Well, Muhammad's the last and greatest prophet. Quran is the word of Allah, or God. Jesus is not God, not the Son of God, didn't die on a cross, didn't rise from the dead. Other than that, they're very consistent with Christianity, right? They're the antithesis of Christianity. And of course, they think the Bible's been corrupted. There's lots of quotes I could give you about the attitude. This is the former president, Ahmadinejad, and basically it all has to do with getting rid of Israel. But I want to get to how Israel's going to respond. So how will Iran try to destroy Israel? They want to, but how will they do it? Will they use the proxy war? They've been doing that for decades now, trying to get the surrounding countries to do their dirty work. What about nuclear weapons? And that's the big issue right now. That's the elephant in the room, nuclear weapons. And in 2002, the fact that Iran was moving toward nuclear capabilities became very, very clear. Of course, they deny it, but nonetheless, they continue with that. And Iran is moving its nuclear sites underground now. There's a Zagros site, which is near an area called Natanz, where now they are building, it's so far underground that even the most advanced weapons may not be able to reach. Estimated to be 260 feet underground. There's a picture of it. And of course, Israel's monitoring this on a daily basis. The question is, will they use Israel's actions right now as a justification for going nuclear? And here's the quote. This is just from 2 weeks ago. The threat of the Zionist regime against Iran's nuclear facilities make it possible to review our nuclear doctrine and deviate from our previous considerations. Basically what they're saying is, now we can go for the bomb. That's what we can do now with advanced missiles on our own nuclear sites. And that's from one of their top generals. So now Iran is saying, okay, Israel, you pushed us too far. We're going to go nuclear on you. So what will Israel do about Iran? And does history give us the answer? Well, we saw they launched a preemptive strike in 1967, began the Six-Day War. They launched preemptive strike against the Iraq nuclear site, against the Syria nuclear site. Israel didn't wait for permission from America. They went ahead and did it on their own. And we know Iran has missiles to reach Israel, and they used them just a few weeks ago. And Iran continues to develop nuclear capabilities. Now, can conventional weapons take out the nuclear sites in Iran? Well, the U.S. has this new bomb, can go 200 feet down before detonating. And the question is, can that work? And perhaps even two of those do the job. Some interesting military questions, although some of this goes beyond military to actually some spiritual considerations. Bibi Netanyahu said, look, we're dealing with an attempt by Iran to start a multi-front campaign against us. I instructed the Israeli Defense Force to be prepared for this fight. Our principle is clear. Whoever harms us, we will strike them and give them with great force. Our long arm will reach every terrorist at a time and place of our choosing. So here's Israel's options. What can they do? And what will they do? I'll give you my best estimate here. Well, they could sit back and wait for Iran to have a nuclear strike. Not going to happen. They could use non-military means to take out the reactor, which they've been successful doing with the Stuxnet virus, which has kept Iran from being able to develop faster nuclear capabilities. They imported these nuclear engineers from North Korea, and somehow these North Korean engineers ended up dead. Gee, I wonder why that is. Well, the Mossad has taken care of that. They could put faith in UN sanctions. Doesn't work. They could get the U.S. and other countries on board to have a military strike. That could work. America may or may not join, but perhaps what we're going to see is what they've done before. Israel will strike first and go alone if necessary. Here's quickly Israel's deterrent capabilities. This is all estimates because Israel doesn't even admit they have one nuclear weapon, but the estimate is at least 400 nuclear warheads. They have Jericho missiles that have a 5,000-mile range, so they could reach Iran without a problem. And then they've got these Dolphin-class submarines, and these submarines are just sitting right now in the Persian Gulf. They're sitting there, diesel submarines. Each of these submarines has, oh, by the way, and they have advanced jets. These are stealth fighter jets. Let's talk just briefly, and by the way, the biggest asset, deterrent capability, is the Lord. I believe God has favor on Israel, and is going to make sure that Israel is protected. Let's just talk about this submarine briefly before I get to Ezekiel. There's 5 of these that Israel has, and each of these has 16 cruise missiles. Each of these cruise missiles has a 200 kiloton warhead. The range is at least 1,000 miles, so in the Persian Gulf they can reach about any place in Iran. How much is 200 kilotons? What was the size of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima? 15 kilotons. And there are 16 on each of these 5 Dolphin-class submarines. These are not meant to be first strike, but to be available if an initial strike is launched. This is the response. You wouldn't want this response. It basically would scorch the earth, and Iran would be done. And a 200 kiloton blast, the fireball is 1 mile, the heavy blast 3 miles, the moderate damage, the minor damage goes up to 92 miles from the flash point. So again, here we are, and here we have the neighborhood, and you have little Israel there. Here's Iran over here. Here's the Persian Gulf here with the Dolphin-class submarines ready. And so if Iran is going to make the first move, and will Israel strike Iran's nuclear sites? Here again is my best estimate, best assessment. Will Israel strike? Yes, they will. Secondly, if Israel strikes, where will Israel likely strike? Probably the Natanz, where they have all the nuclear reactors. They're building what they call the yellow cakes to make sure that they can fashion a nuclear bomb to blow up Israel. Will the U.S. assist Israel? Remains to be seen. I would like to think so, but we'll see. Do Arab countries support Iran? Not necessarily. Iran has been the fly in the ointment. They're not Arabs, and they have irritated a lot of people. They're also not Sunni Muslims, they're Shia Muslims. Will Arab countries support an Israeli strike? Now here we get back to what happened in the 1990s. If Israel strikes Iran, will the Arab countries see it as necessary, or will this be Muslims against Jews? That's the big question. So we don't know the answer. What will the result of the Israeli effort to destroy Iran's nuclear site? What will be the result? Remains to be seen. But what will be the result if Israel does not strike and Iran has nuclear capabilities? It's unthinkable because they will use their bomb against Israel. So let's go to Ezekiel 38 and we'll wrap things up here. So Ezekiel says this is going to happen. The dry bones, they're scattered, then they come back to life. And it says that Iran, Persia will move against Israel. You'll have to read these on your own. Ezekiel's dry bones. Valley full of dry bones. Finally, Ezekiel says, can the bones live? The bones of the house of Israel. We're told that. And they're going to come together in 3 stages: scattered, returned, and then finally God's Spirit. I don't think we're here yet. A lot of evangelism's happening in Israel, but we're still a ways away from seeing it completed. Modern Israel seems to be the fulfillment. We're in either stage 2 or stage 3. I can't go into this in any detail, but what we see is, in the last days, Israel's living securely in the last days, and who's going to be aligned against them? Gog, Magog, and Persia. So we have Iran in the mix in Ezekiel 38. And is this Armageddon? Probably not Armageddon, because the invasion of Israel describes this alliance of nations to go against Israel, and it perhaps paves the way for the Antichrist. Armageddon is this world war at the end of a 7-year tribulation period, immediately preceding Christ's return to earth. So who wins the battle? Ezekiel says that God make sure that they know that he is the Lord. The Lord himself comes against the invaders and destroys them. There'll be a great earthquake, and the nations will be chaos, and Israel will prevail. And let me wrap it up. Oh, if Israel attacks Iran, what should we do? Number one, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Number two, recognize the divine purpose in the coming invasion. God says this will happen that they may know that I am the Lord. And it's an opportunity for us to say, God told us about this, now let me tell you why we're here and tell people about the plan of salvation. Here's the three takeaways before I close. First of all, God is in control. Jeremiah tells us that I'm the Lord and nothing's too hard for me. Secondly, we've been given signs of what to expect. There's going to be a temple, there's going to be an antichrist, there's going to be attacks on Israel. It's in the book, and that's happening as we live. Number three, we are to redeem the time because the days are evil. And lastly, a final word of hope. Luke 21:28. When these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your eyes because your redemption draws near. We're one day closer to Jesus coming back and set us all free. Thank you. Come on up, Mike. I went over by 1 minute.
Thank you very much, John. We appreciate it.